Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, here on this Thursday afternoon. It's a little bit of a slow day once again. I mean, there aren't really many NBA games to talk about, and the WNBA season, the playoffs have yet to start. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the WNBA once the playoffs actually start. And we can, we'd actually be able to talk about some of the teams that are competing in this postseason, and we see the stories developing around those teams and the teams they go up against. But right now, the biggest story going on in the offseason is that Curry, he, for some reason, or for one reason or another, decided to remove Warriors guard from his Instagram bio, and a lot of people are freaking out now because everyone's like, okay, what does this mean? Is Steph Curry not going to sign his extension? And I'm just going to go ahead and talk a little bit about that in the first segment. And then in the second segment, I'm going to talk about some trade rumors. A lot of them are surrounding Julius Randle, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about what that could mean for the Knicks and Julius Randle's future with the Knicks. Then in the third segment, I'm going to talk about the teams with the best chance to win their first ever title. So I'm just going to be ranking the teams that I think, from the team that could least likely win a title to the team that could most likely win their first title. And then in the fourth segment, I'm going to talk about whether or not I feel like the 76ers actually have what it takes this year to finally win an NBA title under Joel Embiid, along with the rest of the pieces and the roster changes that they've made. And then we also have our special fifth segment where I usually reveal it at the end of every fourth segment, but over this past week, I've basically done an MVP debate where I argue whether or not a certain player deserves an MVP. I've done it for a majority of players. I've done it for a majority of this week. Excuse me. So if you guys want to see who I'm going to talk about in this fifth segment, be sure to tune in towards the end as I reveal it at the end of the fourth segment. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Before I begin, I'd like to remind everybody that we do like to hear from you guys during the show, regardless of what you have to say, from whether it be a burning question, a hot take, or something you've been dying to share. We're all ears. This show is all about keeping the conversation lively, and if you really want to make sure that your comment or question gets noticed, just go ahead and use Super Chat, hit the $ below the chat box, send in your message, and it's guaranteed to get featured on the show. It's also a great way to support our channel. Your Super Chats help us keep the lights on and bring you even more of the content you love. And if Super Chat isn't really your thing, you can always use the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment or in the description, gsmcspodcast.net. That really helps the show as well, and it makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. So let's go right ahead and dive into this first segment, which is talking about Steph Curry and how he changed his Instagram bio. Now, usually when a lot of players, whenever they change something in their Instagram bio that's related to the team that they're affiliated with, usually the media just goes insane because it's like, what's going on? What's happening? Why did they remove the team that they play for under their bio? A lot of players, they do this whenever they haven't reached an agreement with their contract, like if they haven't reached a contract agreement with the team that they're currently on. A lot of players, they like to do this to try and spark some sort of controversy, maybe get some sort of leverage in contract discussions, and maybe the pressure of disappointing all of your fans. If you are a big time free agent, and if you are a big time player for a certain organization and you're threatening to leave, the fan response might threaten the franchise to encourage a deal with you and make a better deal with you and abide by your terms a little bit better. So those are some of the reasons why some other athletes have used or have done this in the past. And if you remember recently, Klay Thompson removed the Warriors from his bio at one point, and when Klay Thompson removed the Warriors from his bio, he ended up getting traded over to the Dallas Mavericks. So it should be noted that Klay Thompson, he did this first, and he eventually got removed from the Warriors roster. And since he was dealt in that trade, there's a small possibility that maybe Steph Curry could wind up, doing the same thing with the Golden State Warriors. Like, the same result could end up happening with Steph Curry and the Warriors and them falling out. So this isn't news that if you're a Warriors fan, you definitely don't want to hear this, because a lot of Warriors fans, they do have that fear that if the Warriors don't stay a competent franchise, like if they don't stay a competing franchise, then Steph Curry is going to want to leave, because Steph is still a title contending player. Like, he still has what it takes to be a legitimate option for a title contending team, and he's most likely not going to want to waste those years just fighting for mediocrity and fighting for a spot that doesn't even determine that they'll end up winning the postseason in the end. And if your team isn't in the best spots of winning, and you have a player that really wants to win, it ultimately might end up souring the relationship, and maybe Steph doesn't want to be a part of the rebuilding that the Warriors would most likely have to do, and that might rub a lot of people the wrong way. So Warriors, according to this article, Steph Curry will likely never play for another franchise. And that said, his social media activity on Wednesday left many pondering about the legendary shooter's future in the Bay Area. So it's like, even then, the article starts with saying that they don't believe that Steph Curry is going to leave. And it's really difficult to think of a player that has been in one jersey for their entire career wear another jersey for another franchise. It's almost unheard of. Like, a lot of people were shocked when Tony Parker left the San Antonio Spurs and played for the Hornets for a short period of time. It's something that you don't really expect to hear of, and it's something that you really don't expect to even happen. So, I mean, the fact that he changed it from guard for the Warriors, that's obviously it's going to rub a lot of people a different direction. So, not to mention, Curry also changed his Twitter profile, or his X profile, whichever you want to call it, and header with photos from the 2024 Paris Olympics, replacing earlier images of him in a Warriors uniform. Curry also shared a collaborative post with LeBron James with the caption, "Same team, winning team." So with these changes to his social media, a lot of people are thinking that maybe these two are going to team up. I talked about this before in another segment of how the Warriors and the Lakers, they almost tried to trade LeBron James over to Golden State. So it was definitely a possibility, and given the recent Olympics, they do play pretty well together. Their play styles complement each other very well. And Curry has been, he really is beaming with pride ever since his Olympic gold medal run. And that was the only piece of hardware that he was missing from his cabinet before the Paris Games. And many Warriors fans perceived it as a sign of the sharpshooter teasing a potential linking with LeBron in the NBA. And so, this removing Golden State Warriors guard from his bio only adds on to those speculations. And we're also living in an era of overreaction where everybody watches everyone's move on social media, and it's like, the minute, even if you change one little thing, it's going to be a big deal. And Steph Curry being the player that changed his bio, ultimately it just makes it a bigger deal by default. And I for one have been saying that I feel like Steph Curry is going to retire as a Warrior, but I have also said that about Klay Thompson. So I'm not entirely sure really where the Warriors' direction is going, and whether or not they're actually going to be inclined to trade Steph. I'm not entirely sure on that. Kendrick Perkins has also recently suggested that if the Lakers and Warriors get off to a poor start in the 2024-2025 season, Curry and James could pressure their franchises into trading them, and that would shift the entire landscape of the NBA. If LeBron or Steph Curry, if they end up teaming up with each other on a different team or on either one of those teams, then it could ultimately put either one of those teams into title contention. And that could be either a good or a bad thing depending on where you stand in the NBA standings, as well as who you want to win their NBA title in the 2024 and 2025 season. So that's basically like all that I have to say regarding Steph Curry and his change in his social media bio. So, I mean, let me know in the comments what you guys think. Do you guys think Steph Curry is going to stay with the Warriors? Do you think this is just like a publicity stunt? Do you think that this is, that there's nothing to really worry about, that this is just a thing that Steph Curry is doing and it's like, it's nothing less and it's nothing more? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. But now we will go ahead and go on to the second segment where I talk about Julius Randle being involved in trade rumors, and I'm just going to go ahead and talk about that in the second segment, so be sure to stay tuned for that right after this short break, and I will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC basketball podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this second segment, I'm going to be talking about some trade rumors, specifically the trade rumors and surrounding Julius Randle, because now a lot of Knicks executives and a lot of people close to the Knicks are saying that Julius Randle is going to get involved in a trade, and I didn't really want to believe the reports until I looked further into it, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about that. But before I begin, I do like to remind everybody that we do like to hear from you guys during the show. Whether you have a burning question or whether you have a hot take, we are all ears. And if you really want your comment or question to get noticed, then you can go ahead and use Super Chat. Just hit the $ below the chat box, or you can send in your message. It's guaranteed to get featured on the show. It's also a great way to support our channel. We're so grateful for each and every one of you who joins us here to support. It really makes all of the difference. If Super Chat isn't really your thing, then you can always use the link in the description or the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcspodcast.net. It really helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. Once again, the link is gsmcspodcast.net, or you could use the Super Chat feature. Either or really helps the show. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the trade talks surrounding Julius Randle. Now, when there were discussions about the Knicks potentially, when the Knicks first acquired Mikal Bridges and they also signed OG Anunoby to that huge contract, I assumed that Jalen Brunson was going to also ask for a lot of money in the extension that he signs, and would therefore have to enable the Knicks into trade talks regarding Julius Randle, because I figured that when they acquired Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby signed that huge contract, they were going to go all in on the Villanova roster as well as just the Villanova squad, and Julius Randle would be left out of it. And I didn't really expect Julius Randle to be playing for the Knicks this next season after the Knicks acquired Mikal Bridges. I thought that Julius Randle would maybe even be involved in the deal acquiring Mikal Bridges, but they were able to avoid that scenario, and they were able to get Mikal without even needing to trade for Julius Randle. And so once that happened, I was like a little bit skeptical on whether or not they wanted Randle to return, but it was all down to whether or not Jalen Brunson was going to sign the huge contract that everyone thought he deserved. But then Jalen Brunson ended up getting a huge pay cut, and that was when the thoughts of Julius Randle leaving the Knicks were sort of put to the side, because it would seem like the Knicks were very adamant on, rebuilding and regrouping the same group that they had and trying again to beat the Boston Celtics. And I didn't really think Randle was going to get involved in trade talks this early, but here we are. So despite making it to the All-Star team and getting selected to be an All-Star in 3 of the last 4 seasons, the Knicks forward Julius Randle's trade value, it's not really that high. And which is another reason why I didn't think he was going to get involved in trade talks, because the value for him isn't going to be nearly as high as it probably should be for somebody who made the All-Star team in, again, 3 out of the last 4 years. And one anonymous member of the rival front office told Fred Katz of The Athletic that Randle's value to opposing teams is neutral at best. Whatever neutral means, that's where Julius Randle stands. And, obviously neutral. The article isn't really going to explain what Fred Katz meant by a neutral sort of agreement at best, but, in the future, time will tell if the Knicks end up deciding to trade him. And the 29-year-old also still has 2 seasons remaining on his 4-year, $117 million contract that he signed with the Knicks all the way back in 2021. However, he has a player option that's worth $30 million for the 2025 and 2026 NBA season, and could choose to decline it if he's continuing to perform at an all-star level, and could even ask for a raise at that point, which would really seem to put the Knicks in a situation that they don't want to be in, because it's like they might have to debate on overpaying Randle, and they might also, maybe they wouldn't want to overpay Randle, but they'd also still want to keep their roster intact. And so discussing a deal with Randle regarding the fact that he's probably not going to get paid as much might not really keen his interest, right? So the fear of giving Randle a long-term contract after his current deal expires makes it really difficult for the Knicks to find willing suitors to trade him up for, and they're also not really willing to give up significant assets in order to make a trade worthwhile. And Randle could receive another contract from New York, although SNY's Ian Begley reported on July 17th that extension talks aren't at the forefront for either side. So it's not even like any of the sides are even in negotiations of an extension, which makes Julius Randle being traded even more likely, because it doesn't seem like the Knicks are all that worried on signing Randle. And so the former first-round pick is eligible for a 4-year deal worth up to $181 million. And that doesn't mean that a trade is coming, as Katz noted on Thursday that there is no indication that the Knicks are actively attempting to move on from Randle. And New York is also trying to compete with the Boston Celtics at the top of the Eastern Conference. So it would make sense that after acquiring Mikal Bridges and re-signing OG Anunoby during the offseason, that they would want to keep Julius Randle to sort of maintain some depth in their rotation and, still have that scoring option for the Knicks in case, the going gets tough against the Boston Celtics. Like, if, for example, Jalen Brunson, if he's having a little bit of a lackluster night offensively, you'd want to have Julius Randle in there to sort of pick up the slack and hopefully perform at a level that's competent enough for him to be called one of New York's second options, and for him being an all-star caliber kind of player. These are the kind of performances that you really expect from him, and you hope that he can have during his tenure on the New York Knicks. So, they're really, the Knicks, they're holding on to him in like sort of the hopes that he develops into this really good postseason performer, which is something that he's really been struggling for in like these recent years with the Knicks. Like, he did have a game winner against the Miami Heat at one point in the postseason, but aside from that, it's not like he's really known as a postseason performer. And this article goes on talking about how they sort of have Julius Randle in the expectation that he's going to perform well against the Boston Celtics. So he really they're saving Julius Randle for the postseason, which is something that isn't really something that Julius Randle excels at. And so, this is obviously, pretty risky for the New York Knicks, banking on someone that doesn't really perform well in the postseason or really well under pressure. But in the end, we are going to have to just see how the end results fare, because they do, of all the teams in the Eastern Conference, I do think that with this roster, they do have the best chances of being able to compete against the Boston Celtics. And really, if you have a chance to compete against the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference, I feel like you should take that chance, because you don't know how much or how big of a championship window the Celtics actually have, and you might actually be able to impede on their success with the roster that you have going for you. So I think the Knicks, they should try to make it work with Randle, and if the trade is going to happen, it should happen in maybe a season or two, and it shouldn't happen anytime around this season. That's something that you should really be looking forward to if you are a New York Knicks fan and if you do follow the Knicks. So that's all that I really have on this segment about Julius Randle. So now we will go ahead and go into the third segment, where I talk about the teams with the best chances of winning an NBA title for their first NBA title in their franchise right after this short break. So be sure to tune in to that topic right after this break. I'll be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC basketball podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, I will be talking about, I'll be ranking the teams that I think have the best chances of winning their first NBA title. And I'll be doing so with a list. I'll be going from teams that are least likely to win a title to the teams that are most likely to win their first title. Again, I should let people know that these are teams that could win their first title, meaning their first title in the history of their franchise. So teams that have already won a title but have players on the team that haven't won a title aren't going to be mentioned on this list. So these are just the teams that have a chance of winning their first NBA title and how close they have that chance and just how much of a chance they actually have of winning in this coming season. So that should be noted before we move on to the list. And you guys, have questions like, oh, why aren't the why aren't the Cavs on this list, or why aren't the Knicks on this list? Well, that's because they've already won titles in the NBA, just not when we've been alive, or just haven't won in a while. So that's just for people disclose. Like, that's just for disclosing the information to all of you guys that just end up tuning in right now and tuning into the podcast now before I actually go into this list. Again, these are just teams that have not won a title yet, okay? So, first team on this list is, of course, the Brooklyn Nets. And of all the teams that haven't won a title in this, in the entire conviction of the NBA, the entire conception of the NBA, the Nets are the team that are least likely to win a title of all the teams that don't have one on this list. And really, the Brooklyn Nets for this season, it doesn't seem like they're even going to win one for this season either. It looks like they're tanking, and they recently traded away They recently traded away Mikal Bridges. Excuse me, I mixed up some of the players. And they recently got a lot of picks out of that trade for Mikal Bridges. So it seems like the Nets, they're sort of rebuilding for the future, and they're trying to establish a nice core lineup for the future of their team in case they end up landing on draft picks. And the Bridges trade, it might actually, it's probably going to be the beginning of a max exodus of established talent out in Brooklyn, and a lot of any sort of semi-established vet who can attract a win-now shopper should be on the block. And so it's really this is a team that's you're sort of waiting for the right players to be on your roster. And so the championship, it might not come this season. In fact, it's definitely not going to come after this season. But they do have a chance of winning a title in the future with the roster that they have. A team that's in a similar spot as the Brooklyn Nets are the Charlotte Hornets. They're another team that most likely won't win a title now, but given their drafting and given their the talent that they have on the roster, the fact that they have a lot of young players, it is a possibility that in the future they could be a contending team. And right now they do have a pretty good star in LaMelo Ball, but LaMelo has to remain healthy for Charlotte, and if he wants to remain reliable on the roster for that team. And so as of right now, they probably won't be a good team. They piled up 116 losses over the last 2 seasons, which is really, really bad. And they should obviously here and there show flashes of their greatness, but it's not going to be long term. So again, this is just another team that should wait for their title opportunity. It's not going to come this coming season. It's probably not going to come in the season after, but they do have a pretty solid core that they can build around and could experiment on and see if they can get better in the future. And Next team on this list is the Utah Jazz. Now, the difference between the Jazz and the rest of the teams that I mentioned, like with Brooklyn and Charlotte, is that the Jazz arguably already have their number one option. They just signed Lauri Markkanen to a $238 million deal for 5 years, and he's only 27 years old. So he could end up, he also made the All-Star game before, and he was in the three-point shooting competition before. So there is a chance that he could develop into being a pretty solid player for the Utah Jazz. And really all that's left is for the Jazz to acquire some competent role players to sort of make Lauri Markkanen's job a little bit easier. And they really have to commit on Lauri Markkanen being their number one option. And so they just have to hope that they land on draft picks, and so they could secure a championship roster. Because as of right now, they don't have a championship caliber roster, but they did get the most difficult part out of the way, which is finding their star for the team. And now the next player, well, not the next player, the next team on this list is the Los Angeles Clippers. Now, this is a team that, on paper, excuse me. Sorry for that. But this is a team that throughout history and time again, they have championship caliber pieces. They have championship caliber players. They have teams that could end up winning a championship in the future, right? They do have that. That's one thing that the Clippers have always had. They always seem to have a championship-ready roster. It's just their performance off of the paper. Like, on paper, they're great, but every single time and every single year off paper, they always disappoint. So, excuse me, I understand, and I'm sure you guys can understand as well, why the Clippers are so low on this list. Despite having James Harden and Kawhi Leonard, and a majority of the same pieces that they had in the previous lineup, they still aren't really considered favorites in winning a title this coming season, and most likely in the future they're probably not going to be favorites. Like, every single year the Clippers, they always have talent, but every single year they always fail under pressure. And it's like, it's amazing when you have a team that has Kawhi Leonard and James Harden as your number one and number two option, that they're so low on this list. And that's like, again, like they do have a chance to win a title, but is it going to happen for this season? I don't think so. But they do have a chance, and they were able to re-sign James Harden in the free agency, and so they're still going to have Harden for a couple of years, but like, how much of a good enough Harden are you going to have for that span? Like, I don't know where this club's optimism is going to be at now, especially after losing Paul George in free agency and also losing Russell Westbrook to the Denver Nuggets. Like, they did lose a considerable amount of pieces for their team, and like, while I don't really consider Russell Westbrook as a valuable piece now, I mean, his 11 points and his averages were very consistent for the Clippers. So it's really going to be interesting how they're able to build from this loss. But we'll see once this season unfolds, and we'll see if they do have a chance in the postseason. Because again, they still have Kawhi and they still have James Harden. So the next team on this list is the Pelicans with Zion and Brandon Ingram, and really, they do have a shot of making it deep in the postseason for this year. They recently acquired DeJounte Murray, and they didn't even have to get rid of Brandon Ingram or Zion Williamson to get him. And there's still like a debate on whether or not Brandon Ingram is going to become that dominant scorer that everyone like hopes he can be. And there's also discussions on whether or not the deal between Brandon Ingram and Anthony Davis is really going to materialize over in New Orleans. And the big man rotation on New Orleans doesn't seem to be getting any better. And in fact, it's actually only gotten worse, losing a lot of players like Larry Nance Jr. and Valanciunas, and like, losing all of those players doesn't really help the rotation, And actually, wait, no, they didn't lose. Yeah, no, they ended up losing Larry Nance in a trade, and they ended up all of these. They still don't have a competent rim protector at the center. They do have Zion, but I don't really trust Zion into defending every single power forward or big man that the Pelicans would come across. And Ingram is still a pretty talented player, but it's like, can Ingram get even more talented than what he is right now? That's really the question, and that's really, once they answer the rotation problem at the center position, then that's sort of when they can start asking themselves whether or not they're in the right spot to compete for a title. And the next team on this list is the Indiana Pacers. Last season, they were somewhat helped due to a lot of injuries, like primarily with the Milwaukee Bucks and the New York Knicks. But they did somewhat, I can't really say make the series competitive against the Boston Celtics. But like, the Celtics were essentially the one thing that was stopping the Pacers from making it to the finals. So if they're able to stop the Celtics and, maybe even beat them in a series, then they could possibly make it all the way to the finals and win it in this year. So right now we're entering into the territory of teams that have a shot of winning a title in this season. And they do still have a lot to improve on their defense if we're going to consider last season. But I do think that this team does have a lot of potential going into this season. And if Halliburton can get better, then their chances just improve. So not really much that needs to be said about the Pacers because, again, they're already a really competent team. Same thing goes with the Orlando Magic. I think their title window is more suited for the future more than right now, but they do have a shot right now to win a title in this season and even in the season after. If Paolo Banchero can make a huge leap in efficiency and production, then the sky is the limit for this team. And not to mention, I did also like Franz Wagner. He has shown that he is a very, very competent shooter in the Olympics, and so I actually think that he could be a pretty solid piece for this Orlando Magic team, especially now that they'll have him under contract for a couple of years. So, and not to mention, you also have to remember that these players, like, they're competent and they're so young as well. Paolo Banchero, he's only 21 years old, and Franz Wagner is only 22 years old. So they're going to have these guys for probably a while. They also have Jonathan Isaac, who is a pretty competent defender, and they have a very competent team. So it's like they could really go far. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Orlando Magic end up becoming a dark horse candidate into winning these NBA Finals. And another team that I don't really expect to be a dark horse candidate is the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, they're a team last season. They didn't really play all that well. They were one of the worst teams in the Western Conference, but a big reason as to why that was is because Ja Morant was injured for a majority of the time. And when your best player is injured, obviously your team and your production is going to get a little bit worse. And Ja Morant's production is he almost averages 27 points per game in a season, and it's like you really need that kind of production if you want to win a lot of games in the NBA, especially this coming season. They're going to need all of Ja Morant if they want. They could win now. They definitely do have the chance to win now, and I don't think that's really going to happen. I still think that the players, they need to. This year is probably not going to be their year because they have to work on establishing the chemistry again with Ja. But once they do that, then the sky is the limit and they could definitely compete for a title. Next team on this list is the Phoenix Suns. Now, they're a team that's sort of forced to run it back due to the contracts that all of their players are under. And they might not want to run it back with Bradley Beal, but they don't really have a choice. But, when you have Kevin Durant and Devin Booker on the roster, it's like you seem to always have a chance of winning a title. They got swept last season, but then again, they didn't really have much chemistry last season. They were still fighting injuries, Bradley Beal in particular. But if they play another season, then I mean, there is a good chance that they end up making it all the way. Again, a team that has Devin Booker and Kevin Durant is a very dangerous team. And if Bradley Beal can figure out his role on the team and actually, produce in his role, then again, this is another team where the sky is the limit. And if all they really have to do is perform, that's where the pressure is for this team, to perform. And this is like, for the remainder of the time that they have Kevin Durant, then their championship hopes are still pretty alive and they're still pretty strong. And the final team on this list is the Minnesota Timberwolves. Obviously, the team that made it all the way to the Western Conference Finals in this previous season. Obviously, this team is going to have the best chances of winning a title both this season and the next season and the season after that. And as long as they have their duo in Karl Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards, you really shouldn't count this team out because, I mean, Anthony Edwards sort of showed everybody what he could do in the postseason, and I don't think he's really going to slow down. A lot of people consider him to be the face of the league, and a lot of people consider him to being one of the best dunkers in the NBA aside from Ja Morant. So really, the question is if these guys can stay healthy for these next few years and if they have what it takes to move on from the second round. That's not the second round, but from the conference finals. That's really going to be the question for this team. So that's all that I have on the teams that could potentially win their first title this coming season. So in the next segment, I'm going to go ahead and talk about the 76ers and how this is probably their best chance to win a title in this season and what could happen in the future with Joel Embiid on the 76ers if they don't end up winning a title now that they have Paul George on the roster. So I'll be right back after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, I'm going to be talking about the 76ers and how this is probably their best chance to win a title with Joel Embiid, given the pieces that they've acquired in free agency. So as all of you guys may know, the 76ers, they recently acquired Paul George in free agency. Now, when you pair that up with Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, everybody is expecting a title out of the 76ers, and that this is arguably one of their best chances to compete a title compete for a title, as this is their best chances of beating the Boston Celtics. Now, over the years, the Sixers and the Celtics, they've been duking it out in the postseason ever since Wilt Chamberlain was on Philly, and ever since Bill Russell was on Boston. They've always been a very competitive rivalry. Well, I only mean to say a competitive rivalry. I don't really mean to say that, and just by the environment. I don't mean to say the actual competition is all that competitive, because throughout a majority of the years, the Celtics have always beaten the 76ers. And it's not just in history in general, but in recent history, the Celtics have always beaten the 76ers. And it's something that you come to expect in every single postseason. You always expect the 76ers to fall short, most likely against the Boston Celtics. And given now that they have Paul George, this is arguably their best chances of winning a title in their entire existence, right? And after signing Paul George and the rest of the cast in free agency, the Sixers are one of the favorites heading into the 2024 and the 2025 season. The Boston Celtics and the Oklahoma City Thunder are the only two teams that have better odds than the 76ers at the moment, according to DraftKings Sports, which is a little bit surprising considering how the Knicks ended up beating the 76ers, but I guess adding Paul George is going to do that to your rankings. Now, the optimism is obviously, like, again, Paul George. It's warranted, so it makes sense that a lot of people are really optimistic about the 76ers. And not to mention the promise that Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey bring to the roster as well. And the additions that they got in free agency, Caleb Martin, Andre Drummond, Eric Gordon, and Reggie Jackson, they also give the 76ers a really well-rounded group of veterans, particularly with Kelly Oubre Jr. and Kyle Lowry in the fold as well. So the Sixers, they definitely have a very solid team to compete for a title. So if George and Joel Embiid stay healthy, the 76ers could break through their second round ceiling this season, and they could maybe even win a title. But again, this is just optimism. Like, the 76ers, they always, almost every single year, fall short when titles and like greatness is expected from them. And really, the best chance that they had in winning was when they lost to the Toronto Raptors in 2018. And actually, wait, no, not in 2018. It was in 2019 when they lost to the Raptors. They lost to Kawhi Leonard off of a brutal buzzer beater. That was one of the best. That was one of the better teams that Philly constructed. Having Jimmy Butler, Joel Embiid, and Ben Simmons paired up with each other was very, very dangerous. And once they lost in the postseason to Kawhi Leonard, that was as quickly as they lost, that was as quickly as their title hopes ended right there, as Jimmy Butler ultimately ended up leaving. So this team, it's really been full of just disappointments, and I don't really think that while they do have, on paper, they do have the best chance to win a title, I don't think that I think the chances they're only going to get worse and worse as the season progresses, because again, this is still really optimistic on Joel Embiid and his health status for the postseason. One of the things that has plagued Joel Embiid throughout the majority of his career are his injuries, and he's almost always injured once the postseason comes. So if he's injured in this postseason, then it's like, there go your title hopes. And when you're relying on somebody who is as injury prone as Joel Embiid, I don't think your odds are going to be great from the start. And I don't think you can really continuously gamble on somebody like him, especially when he has only had one healthy postseason in his entire career. And even then, that one healthy postseason was just a 4-game series. That was, it wasn't, everybody knew that the Celtics were going to end up winning that series. It wasn't a question. And it's like, yeah, I know, the Celtics, they ended up beating the 76ers in the only series where Joel Embiid was actually healthy. And again, it's like, it's one of those things where it's like you don't want the Sixers, you don't want this trend to continue repeating if you are a Sixers fan. And so you're just like, maybe this is the year that Joel Embiid finally stays healthy. But given how he has yet to do that, I don't really think you can, I don't really think it makes sense to get off on the idea that this will be the year that he stays healthy, because it's like he doesn't really have a good enough track record in staying healthy. So I don't really think their championship odds, I don't think their odds are great. They might be great on paper, but outside of that, it's it leaves little to be desired. So that's all that I have on this segment, and it's a little bit of a shorter segment, so we'll go ahead and go into the fifth segment, where I talk about a player who I think doesn't deserve the MVP for a specific year. And a lot of people, they argue whether or not he deserves any of his MVPs, so I'm just going to go ahead and talk a little bit about that right after this short break. So be sure to stay tuned and figure out who this player is. And just a little bit of a spoilers, the year is 2006. So figure out who the MVP is for that year, and I'll be right back after this short break. And we are back with the fifth and the final segment of the GSMC basketball podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fifth segment, I'm going to be talking about a player who, in my opinion, doesn't deserve to win an MVP in a specific year. Now, this player that I'm going to go over is he's a little bit controversial in the sense that a lot of people, they think that he also doesn't deserve the MVP for this year, despite the fact that his numbers are pretty impressive. And, this player, he won the MVP award over a lot of fan-loving players, I guess you could say. They have a really strong fan base. So, it makes sense that a lot of these people would think that their favorite player deserves the MVP over this specific player. But, obviously, I mentioned before, the best, in my opinion, this year, it's 2006. So, the player that obviously won the MVP for 2006 in the MVP race was Steve Nash. So he won back-to-back MVPs in 2005 and in 2006, and a lot of people, they question his 2004 and 2005 MVP, and that MVP in 2005 is a little bit questionable, but his MVP in 2006, a lot of people think is blatantly wrong. And so I'm mainly going to be focusing on the MVP in 2006 more so than the one in 2005, because the reality is that I think Steve Nash, he deserved at least one of those MVPs. But if he was to win at least one of those MVPs, I would have much rather he won the one in 2005 as opposed to winning in 2006. Now, Steve Nash in 2006, he averaged 19, 11, and 4 for the year, and he also was one of the very few players in NBA history to tally a 50, 40, 90 season in NBA history. And in that 50, 40, 90 season that he has, he also ended up winning the 2006 MVP. And this is one of the things that a lot of people make fun of Steve Nash for his MVPs, because a lot of people, they think that Steve Nash's MVPs weren't really deserved. And a lot of people, they also think that he robbed Kobe of winning the MVP in 2006. And Kobe had a great year too. He averaged 35, 5, and 5 for the Lakers. And he also led the Lakers to 45 wins, which was really the big difference maker in the voting between between voting for Kobe and voting for Steve Nash, because Nash, he put up 19, 11, and 4 on a 54 win Suns team. Meanwhile, Kobe, he ended up putting up 35, 5 and 5 to a 45 win Lakers team. So the win difference between the Lakers and the Phoenix Suns was the big difference maker in terms of in terms of voting, because like obviously, the MVP is most likely, it's going to be reserved 9 times out of 10, it's going to be reserved to the best player on the best team. And Steve Nash having the better record for his team obviously gave him a much better case than Kobe Bryant in the MVP debate. And a lot of people, they aren't really going to give an MVP to somebody who led a team to 45 wins. A lot of people were reluctant to do that when Russell Westbrook won the MVP in 2017. So there's still debate on whether or not Kobe actually even deserved the MVP for this year. But if for the sake of arguments, I'm going to say that if there was any player that got robbed of the MVP in 2006, that it should probably be LeBron James. LeBron averaged 31, 7 and 7 for a 50-win Cavs team, and he didn't end up winning the MVP for this year, which is pretty surprising. But what's actually, in my opinion, probably even more surprising is how Kobe Bryant, despite averaging 35, 5 and 5 for the season, he only ended up finishing 4th in the MVP race. Meanwhile, LeBron James, he actually ended up finishing he ended up finishing 2nd in MVP race with his averages. Averaging 31, 7 and 7 is very impressive, and also leading your team to 50 plus wins, or 50 wins at least, is also very impressive when you're looking at when you're talking about MVP debates. So really, the argument on who deserves the 2006 MVP, it can't really go just to one person. It has to go to two. So the argument becomes, should Kobe deserve it or should LeBron deserve it? And I can't really give an answer to that question because, like, it's really a toss-up. Like, they both have very, very similar numbers, and they both, like, again, the record differential is like 5-game. It's a 5-game difference. And Kobe played in a much tougher conference than LeBron did when the Eastern Conference. Like, the Eastern Conference was nowhere near as competitive as the Western Conference was, and Kobe Bryant was playing against mainly Western Conference opponents. So Kobe, he played in the tougher conference, averaged 35, 5 and 5, but LeBron ended up playing in a little bit of a weaker conference, so his record was a little bit better, but his numbers, his 31 points per game is less than Kobe's 35 points per game, but he did average 2 more assists and 2 more rebounds, which should cancel out the 4 more points that Kobe averaged for that season. So really, if you want to go with just dominance and scoring, you're probably going to go with Kobe. But if you want to go with overall play, then you probably go with somebody like LeBron on who would win the MVP for this season. Another player that's in like the discussion for this debate is Dirk Nowitzki and the Dallas Mavericks. He also has a little bit of an argument when you want to talk about the 2006 MVP was, because in the year 2006, Dirk Nowitzki was 3rd in the MVP race, and he finished the season averaging 26 points, 9 rebounds, 2 assists, shooting 40% from 3, 48% from the field, along with a 51 effective field goal percentage, and he was also shooting 90% from the free throw line. And you might argue, okay, well, I mean, his numbers, they don't really seem nearly as impressive as Kobe's or LeBron's, but he did play in 81 games in this season compared to how Steve Nash only played 79 games, but again, that 2-game difference could make all the difference in MVP talks. And one thing that should also be taken into consideration is how the Dallas Mavericks, they ended up going 60-22 that year. So they were one of the best teams in the Western Conference. In fact, they finished 2nd in the NBA Southwest Division, and going 60-22, it's it's a very, very accomplishing feat. And for the 2005-2006 season, I don't think there were. I think the only team that ultimately ended up winning more games than they did in the entire NBA was, hold on, I do have to think because it was a while ago. I think it was the Spurs. I think the Spurs, they were the only team that ended up getting, because they were second in the Southwest Division, and the only other team that I could think of that would probably have more wins than they did at the time would be the Spurs. And also the Detroit Pistons in that year, they were also really good. They were probably in the number one for the Eastern Conference, but I'm just talking about for the Western Conference. I believe they were just second only to the Spurs. And so Dirk, like, he was able to average his numbers while also being able to be a part of the second best team in the Western Conference, and they had a much better record than Phoenix did in that year. So if there was any other player aside from LeBron or Kobe to win the MVP in that season, it could be Dirk Nowitzki. But again, like, this is just, hypothetical talks, because I genuinely don't think that Steve Nash deserved the MVP. But let me know in the comments what you think. Do you guys think that he deserved the MVP in 2006, or do you think that Kobe or LeBron deserved it more? Or do you think that Dirk Nowitzki or somebody else deserved to win the MVP more in that year than Steve Nash did? Either way, let me know in the comments what you guys think and who you would pick to be your MVP. And personally, I would pick Kobe. I would have much rather liked to see Kobe win the MVP in that season. But if you do want to pick somebody like LeBron, then I completely understand why you want to pick LeBron. He was a phenomenal player for Cleveland in that season, and it makes zero sense how he didn't win the MVP. It also doesn't make any sense how Kobe won the MVP, but I already talked about that. So that's all that I have on this segment. Again, thank you so much for tuning into the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. And we love hearing from what you guys have to say during the show. So if you have a burning question or a hot take for the game or something you've been dying to share, we're all ears. And if you really want your comment or question to get noticed, you can go ahead and use Super Chat. Just hit the $sign below the chat box. Send in your message, and it's guaranteed to get featured on the show. It's a great way to support our channel. And if Super Chat isn't really your thing, you can always you could always have your comments heard via the link displayed below the ticker or the link in the description, gsmcpodcast.net. It really helps the show. It makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. So those are two options for you guys if you want to help the show. But that's all for me on this podcast for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and if you guys really like the MVP segment that I just did, let me know in the comments if you guys would like to see me do more after this week. So again, I'll be doing the live show again tomorrow, same time at 12:30, so be sure to tune in for that. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn.